Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's monthly web workshop. My name is Daniel Perez, and this month's workshop is going to be eMaint X4 Advanced Reporting. So just a few housekeeping items before we start. So the session is going to be recorded, so you can view it at a later date. Everyone's phone is going to be muted, but we do have a chat system, so you can type your questions in at any time. And I will be waiting until the end of the webinar to answer questions. So here are the topics we're going to be going over today. So the very first topic is introduction to reports, just to give people a brief synopsis of what reports are for and just some of the report outputs and how to use reports. So once that's done, we're going to be building an advanced report. And so the bread and butter of reports or advanced reports are calculated fields. So we're going to be creating some calculated fields, and I'm going to be showing you the step-by-step process on how to make those. And then once we've created our reports, I'm going to show you how to set up the auto-generated report properties. That way you guys can get emails of your reports on a calendar basis. Right. So first off, we're going to start with the introduction to reports. So reports give access to metrics and help managers focus on continual improvement. So really what reports are for is giving you a quick access to all the data that's inside of your system. That way, when you are looking to make a decision, you can pull up data and then make a decision based off that data. And so we have two ways of viewing reports. So we have dashboards, which are for quick access. That way you can view your dashboard and pull up a certain section of reports, have them all inside the same dashboard, view them all quickly, and make a decision based off that. Or when you need to pull that data and bring it somewhere else, you can go to the report builder whenever needed. All right. And so here are our report outputs. So the very first report output is graph. So this is an example of a graph here. So you can see we have a lot of different kinds of graphs inside the system. We have bar graphs, we have column graphs, we have line graphs, we have pie graphs. And the other output we have is instrument. So if you ever have a gauge that you'd like to view, so for example, you wanted to have the percentage of work orders completed, you could set that up as an instrument and have that as a gauge that you can see inside of your dashboards. We also have HTML. So HTML is very similar to PDF in its layout. The difference is that it will be in an HTML file format as opposed to a PDF format. And so below that, we have CSV and Excel. So our CSV is just a comma separated values list, and our Excel is Excel files. So here are a couple examples of advanced reports. So the very first report, you can see we have the corrective versus PM for closed work orders. So here you can see we have the corrective being higher than the PMs, and that's something that you typically don't want to do. So you want to try to have your PMs or your preventative maintenance be higher than your reactive maintenance. That way you end up staying on top. And because when you have reactive maintenance, it typically takes longer to fix something that you didn't know what the problem was beforehand, as opposed to having a scheduled maintenance where you're just going to be going through a routine. And so next, we also have another advanced report. So over here we have work orders by problem type. So you can see here how we can combine different graph types together. So here we have a line graph, and here we have a column graph. So we have down here the work order problem types, and we have up here the cumulative percentage So let's move on to advanced reporting. So inside advanced reporting, our bread and butter is calculated fields. So really, what are calculated fields? So calculated fields are the calculations of existing fields and formulas put into a single field. And so why do we use calculated fields? So calculated fields allow us to create reports that we wouldn't be able to create otherwise. So when we create calculated fields, we're going to be doing that inside of the report writer. So I'm going to pull up my account. So here I am inside of the report list. And so let's start off by making a brand new report. All right, and let's make a name for it. So our report will be work orders for the year by assigned to, and let's make it a graph. All right, so when you're inside of the report writer, the very first thing is making the name of the report. Then once that's done, you're going to head over to the report builder. And so inside here, you're going to select the table first. So our table is going to be work orders. Our selected columns, let's pick a couple. Let's pick work order. And so you can see here, we have this option over here. And so that's where we create calc fields. But first, let's finish adding our available columns. So assign to. And so let's put our calculated field in. So the very first thing when you're creating a calculated field is you're going to select the table. You're going to name your calculated field. So I'm going to name this work H. And our field description will be closed work orders. Actually, let's call it total closed work orders. So the very first thing that you do inside the calculated field, so since this is showing for the work status is equal to H, we're going to put that inside of an if statement. So over here, we're going to have IIF, open brackets, close brackets. And so this is our if statement. So inside, we want to fill out this if statement. So the very first part is going to be work status is equal to, and since we are using a character field inside of the work status, because it's AO, we're going to put these quotation marks. So we're going to put AO quotation mark. And so this is the if statement without any actions for follow-up, really. So for follow-up, what we're going to do is we're going to put a 1 inside there because we want to count how many times it shows up as closed. So we're going to put comma, then we're going to put in 1. And since this is an if statement, we have to have it do something when it doesn't fall under this statement. So we're have another comma, and then we're going to put a 0. So what this says is if work.work status is equal to capital O, then it will give 1. Otherwise, if it is not equal to O, then it'll give 0. And actually, since this was closed work orders, let's do this as H. So H is the value for historic. So this will show us a closed work order, but this is only going to show us a closed work order inside of the list view. So if we're viewing each work order individually, it would show us a 1 next to it, but it's not going to be a count. So what we need to do to count this, or to sum it all up, is to put a sum statement around it. So over here, we're going to type in sum, and we're going to put a parentheses here, and then another parentheses. And now we have completed our total closed work orders. So let's hit save. All right, and so also let's make one for open. So we're gonna, again, select our work table. We're going to type in our name, and so that'll be work O, and our field description will be total open work orders. And just like last time, let's start off with our if statement. So if work dot work status is equal to O, comma, then it will be equal to 1. Otherwise, comma, it will be equal to 0. And then we close those parentheses. And then just like with last time, we're going to put a sum around it. So sum and our closing parentheses. Then we hit save. And so let's hit apply changes. So let's add a filter. As you noticed, I wrote work orders for the year. So we want to only grab work orders that were created in this year. So that's also going to be another calc field. However, that calc field should already be by default inside of your accounts. So we can just pull it up right here on your filter. So let's click add rule. And then over here, we're going to search for year. So the first one that pops up should be work order year. So we're going to pick that. And so here we need to write an expression. So just like with the calc fields over here, we were writing a formula that was saying what we're trying to pull. So for the year, because we don't want to put a static year, because we want this to be continually changing. We don't want to have to update this report every time the year changes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put a dynamic year. So in the equals to, we're going to keep that. And where it says values, we're changing that to expression. So now we can type out our dynamic year. So over here, we're going to type in year, open parentheses, date, and open parentheses, close parentheses, and then one more closing parentheses. So essentially we have here year, and then inside of years parentheses, we put date inside there. So what this formula does is say for today's date, because this date, open parentheses, close parentheses, will give you the exact day that you run this graph. And the year will give you the date or the year of that date. And so if we run this now, you can see we don't have all the users that should be in the assigned to. And the reason for that is because we didn't put anything in the group by. So for our group by, we have to put the assigned to field, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to see every individual person inside the assigned to. When I run this right now without anybody inside the assigned to, it's just giving me the total work orders for the whole year. So let's put someone in the, or let's put the assigned to in there. So I'm going to select the assigned to, hit apply changes, and now when I run this, you can see I have 3 people and it's giving me the totals per person. So we have 0 closed work orders for Billy, 1 open for Billy, 21 closed for me, and 1 open for me. And so let's put this into a graph. So since we haven't set up anything inside of the graph yet, if we were to run this as graph, it's just going to be blank. So let's save this real quick, just so we save our progress. And let's hit edit. And so down here, let's head over to our graph properties. So over here, we have the values field, and above that, we have our categories field. So our category is going to be where you put your grouping. So we're grouping by the assigned to, so we want to view that each individual person essentially inside as our category. So we'll put that in there, assigned to, and we're going to call this description technician or just tech, and let's call this, we'll just call it the same name as the report. And where it asks display totals percentage, we're going to say yes, we want to see the total numbers. And we're going to set this a little bit bigger so we can see a bigger graph. And down here we have the values. So inside the values is where you're going to select the field that you want to display inside the report. But as you saw inside of some of the reports I showed previously under the advanced reporting section, you can have multiple fields showing inside the report. So this one right here was a corrective calculated field that shows the total number of corrective. And while this one here is another calculated field, that one shows the PMs. So what we can do is the same thing with those 2 calculated fields we had just created. So let's put those inside of this graph series. So over here where it says add, we can click on that and it'll give us an additional place to put our values fields. So let's add our first one. So we're going to put total open work orders and we'll name it the same. And we'll put our chart type as column. And we'll do the same here for our total closed. And column and regular. All right, so now if we head over to graph and run this, you can see that it gives us these columns right next to each other. So for this section here, you can see Ronald has 2 open work orders and 7 closed work orders, but we can make this a little bit neater. So we have an option called the stacked graph. So let's hit close on this. And let's go back down to our chart format. So instead of regular, let's pick stacked. And let's run it again. So here you can see, because I selected a stacked graph, what it's showing instead is, instead of putting those columns all next to each other, which is a little bit messy, you can have those right on top of each other. So over here we have in the orange, we have the total open work orders, and then above that we have the closed work orders. So you can see a better count of how many work orders were inside or being done by each technician, because here we have here we can go and click on one of these fields and it'll even remove it from the graph, and then we can click on it again and pick the other field instead, and you can see it's showing our graph with just open instead, or both of them, to have both at the same time. So it's a lot neater using a stacked graph when you're using the multiple graph series for the values fields. So this report is completed. Let's hit save. All right, and let's move on to our next report. So the next report, we're going to be using some more complicated calc fields. So let's hit add. And this report is going to be called percentage of work orders completed on time. So essentially, we're going to be viewing a percentage of all the work orders that were completed on time per technician. So this one is not going to be a graph. We're going to instead view this as a HTML. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to get this set up as a auto-generated field where it'll send out this data to a certain user on a calendar basis. So over here in the report builder, I'm going to start off by selecting our table again. So we're going to pick work order, and in our selected columns, we're not going to need too many. So we're going to pick work order number, and then we're going to pick the assigned to. And let's hit apply changes. So the next thing that we're going to do is create our calc field. So this calc field is going to be giving us a percentage value of all the work orders that have been or that are in existence but are overdue. Let's instead say the amount of work orders that were completed on time instead of doing overdue. So start off with work, and we're going to call this overdue or on time. And I'm just going to call it on time W, and we'll call this work completed, or let's call it percentage of work completed on time. And so let's start off with our expression. So the things that we have to consider for this calc field are that there's going to be some users who have a work order that's been open for a long time. So it's past the schedule date, but just because it's past the schedule date isn't going to be the only criteria that we have to keep in mind. So we also have to keep in mind that the work order status is either open or closed, because the criteria can change whether it was a closed work order that was closed a very long time ago, but just because the schedule date has now passed today's date doesn't mean it's overdue. So we have to keep that in mind when we create this calculated field. So we're going to start off with our if statement. So start off with just our if statement, open, close, and then let's start filling it out. So work dot schedule date. And another thing that you can do inside calc fields is you're not constricted to having to follow just is equal to or is not equal to. You can also do things such as is greater than or less than. So in here, we're going to put is less than today's date. So to do today's date, we're going to do date, open parentheses, close parentheses. And as I mentioned before, let's put into account whether this work order is open or closed. So what we're going to do is say and. So we're putting an additional condition inside of this if statement. So and work dot work status is equal to, once again, we got to have our quotation marks because this is a string character. So we're going to put those quotation marks around the O. And now that we have our statement, let's put our first conditional part of the statement. So inside here, we're going to say that if this is true, then we're going to put in a O, or we're going to put in a 0, and then we put another comma. So this part is where it gets a little bit tricky, and that's because we haven't filled all of the possible criteria. So right now we're solving for the possibility that a work order was left open and today's date has passed the work order's scheduled date, but we can put a nested if statement inside of one of these options. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to start another if statement. Even though we haven't closed out this if statement, inside here we're going to say essentially if this is not true, then this if statement should happen instead. So let's start our new if statement. So if, then open close, and then let's go back inside there and start filling it out. So we're going to say work dot work status is equal to our quotation mark H. Then, or actually, we're going to put and, because we have to make sure that not only is this work order closed, but it has to have the scheduled date being less than the completed date. So we're going to put work dot schedule date is less than work dot date completed. And then just like with this over here where I had that 0 and then this whole statement, because we've created a new if statement, we have to finish it off. So we have to put our comma, and we're going to put O or 0, and we're going to put our comma, and this time we're going to say 1. So what this says right now is if work schedule date is less than the date of today and the work status is open, then put a 0 in there. We don't want to count anything. But if that's not true and the work status is equal to H, essentially closed, and when the work order was completed, the date was greater than the date that it was scheduled for, then put a 0 inside there. Otherwise, put a 1 instead. So that's the criteria that we've created. So let's go ahead and save this. Actually, before we save that, let's go ahead and do a little bit more to this, because we want to put the percentage of work completed. So this isn't a percentage. This is just giving us almost a count of what we are, or just a number for when one was completed on time or when it was not completed on time. So let's put a sum around this. So just like before with the first statement, we're going to put parentheses around this whole thing, and we're going to put a sum. So now this is giving us a count for all of these. And so to give us our percentage, we're going to have to divide this by all work orders. So we're going to put this here. So divided by count work dot WO. And so now that we have our percentage, this is just going to be a decimal value. So what we can do to give us a more accurate looking percentage, we can times this by 100. So let's put a star symbol or asterisk and put times 100. So now our percentage of work completed on time calculation should be complete. We have our sum, we have it dividing by the total work, and then finally we have it timesing by 100. That way we have the percentage. So let's hit save. And let's hit apply changes. So just like with the other graph or other report, we have to put in a group. So let's put in our assigned to. Oops, that was not the assigned to. And hit apply changes. And so now if we run this, you can see we got a lot of people inside here. And this is because it's giving us all values from all time. So we want to give, or we want only this year's work orders. So let's type in this year as our description inside the report. That way I know coming back to this report later on exactly what it's for. And inside our filter, let's do the exact same filter we had from before. So let's search for our year. So the first one that pops up is work order year. And let's put our expression. And we'll put in year, open parentheses, close parentheses, and inside that, date, open parentheses, close parentheses. And let's go ahead and save this. And here we're going to run this. So now we have a view of the total work orders that were completed on time per person. So we have Billy's work orders were 0, but as you may have noticed before, we didn't have that many work orders for Billy. So this may not be an accurate representation of how many work orders he's been completing on time. So let's instead edit this again, and we're going to put a function on our work order number. So that work order number that we had over there when we ran this report, that was just a random work order number from one of the assigned work orders to Billy Walters. So what we're going to do is select this pencil here, and we're going to select display function, and we're going to select count, and then we're going to hit proceed. So what this is doing is essentially acting as a pseudo calc field. So it's not it's not exactly the same as a calc field, because this is just a regular field that we put a function on, but it works with the same data if we were to create a calc field that gave us the count of work orders. So let's run this again. So now you can see Billy Walters only had one work order inside of this year, and that's why it's showing that he has 0 completed on time. And that's because he probably is either still working on that work order, or maybe it was never closed, or something along those lines. So let's close this. So with this data, we can do a auto-generated report. So let's save this. And over here, you can see we have a section that's called auto generation properties. So say edit again. And the reason why I left this as a HTML output is because we cannot send graphs through email. So inside of our auto generation properties, we can check this box. So now this report is going to auto generate on a calendar basis. So let's select the auto generation destination. So we're going to select email, and we're going to select our output. So we'll pick HTML, and we have to pick a frequency. So really we want to show how many times is this, or select how many times am I going to be getting this report. So if you wanted to receive this report every Monday, for example, you would type 1 inside here, inside our frequency, and then inside of our frequency type, you're going to select weeks. So this is saying every week you're going to get an email auto-generated that gets sent out. But we haven't put any emails inside here yet. So we have to select who this is going to be sent out to. So inside our email address, I'm going to put my email here. So every week I'm going to get an email that generates somewhere between the time of 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. So I can select the time frame that I want this to generate. Say, for example, I work the night shift, and I want this to show up before I come in for my shift. I can select over here for the 8 a.m. to 12, or if I was the morning shift, I may want this to be 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. And then I can select my next run date. So I want this to run every Monday. So I'm going to select the 23rd, which is the next Monday. And now if I save this report, every Monday I'm going to get a new auto-generated report that's going to give me the data of which the report was, or the data of which the assigned to people completed their work on time. So that way you can keep an eye on how the KPIs are progressing. So every say every week you can get an update, and you can communicate with that assigned to user that his KPIs were maybe low for this week, and he should look towards improving them before the month is up, so that you can have a good month. So those are a couple examples of the kind of reports that you can have inside of the system. So I'm going to head over to the chat now and start answering questions. So I'm going to end the broadcast here.